scripture. The first one comes from 1 Samuel 1. Do you remember this one? Yeah. Common strife back then was if a woman couldn't have kids, she felt like she had of no value, she had of no purpose. But what's unique about this story, 1 Samuel 1, is that throughout the story, this woman who couldn't have kids, she is told she is loved. So I just like to pause there and think about it. So when I tell this story, you'll hear the husband say, well, I love you, and but she really puts her value in one place. And I just think it's important to understand that context, because a lot of times people do feel like, oh, if I don't have kids, or if I can't do this, or I can't do that, I'm not valued. But that is not our tradition. So I really hope you'll listen to that. And we'll read the whole first chapter. And I'll stop it because this chapter has classic human behaviors that happen to this day. There was a certain man of Ramathaim, a Zephite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elu, you get the idea. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man used to get up year by year from his town to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where he had 2 sons, Eli and Hophni, and Phinehas, and the priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and all to her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year, as often as they went up to the house of the Lord. She used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah would weep and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, this is my favorite part, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? It cracks me up because if you're a woman of that time and you read that story, you feel for her. Not only a sister wife was a special kind of sacredness back then, and so instead of them sharing in the children's duties and working and bonding closer together, the other woman constantly makes fun of her, attacks her, and neither woman had a choice about, the era, the customs, but they had a choice in their actions. And so the one woman's attacking the other woman, and then, so what does the man do to make her feel better? Well, why are you sad? You have my love. Have any of you ever heard that? Come home, a spouse said, why are you sad? You have me. You have all you need. Anyway, you have to read the humor in it. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost and the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to you, your servant, a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regret your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Then Eli answered, go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your sight. Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their houses. For the Lord had remembered her, and in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I have asked him of the Lord. The man Elkanah and all his household went up to offer the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and remain there forever. I will offer him as a Nazirite for all time. Her husband Elkanah had said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him only. Then may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with her 3-year-old bull, an elephant of flour, and skin of wine. And she brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me the petition that I made to him. Therefore I have left him to the Lord as long as he lives. He is given to the Lord. And then she left her child there. That's a pretty big story, huh? Can you imagine waiting all that time for a child and then offering? Yeah. I don't think the story there, people kind of sometimes will say, well, was she bargaining with the Lord? I don't think she was bargaining with the Lord. I think she was just in such a deep state of deprivation. And it's interesting to note her husband's response. At the end of it, he says, do what you think is right. He doesn't totally support her in that decision that she has made, but she stays convicted to her beliefs and what she does. And I think deep down in the end, I kind of think she learned that even though she had a child, she was still worthy of God, was she not? Like she could hold her head up high in a different way. It wasn't the fact that she had a child or that she dedicated the child to God. It was the fact that she, as a woman, continued to come to God in her state of crisis. And then when that state of crisis boiled up and she continued to pray, and even the priests are mocking her, once her petitions are granted, she still offers that child as a gift to God to serve in the temple, which is still a practice somewhere around the world. She holds her head up high because she made the choice to follow through on the promise. So it wasn't what she could do or not do physically, it's what she could do with her heart. So Luke 17, verses 5 through 10, talks a little bit about gratitude, and it's a little shorter. The apostles said to the Lord, we have the old writing in there, huh? Hold on. That's last week's. Yep. This is why I like to print it out. All right, who's the Bible geek? Who knows where it is? Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And when he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to be returned and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God. All right. Find my note cards. Here we are. 10%. That's an interesting number. What in the old laws are we supposed to tithe? 10%. Yep. And so here this number 10% shows up again. And one challenge we're going to challenge people and kids to do is to give away 10% of their candy. So if they get 10 pieces of candy, how much do they give away? One. So I'll challenge the Messy Church kids, and then I'm going to challenge my own kids. 10% goes, and we practice this tithing. No, usually I try to get the candy. Well, my old church, we would give the candy to a counseling office for Crosswalk, the homeless teens in Spokane. And they put them in counselors' offices, like on the table, to encourage kids to come in there. They'll use candy as an excuse, but it gets them into a safe place where they can talk and share. So I don't know. I haven't had a calling yet where we should do it. So if one of you know the area better than me, if you have a calling where we should send our candy, I'm happy to do it. I am happy to. Shalom Ministries would take it, their homeless program, and it turns out homeless people love candy too. So, we could also share it at the community meal. They would love to take a pocket full of candy. And it's kind of fun to watch them because they do the exact same thing we all do. They look for their favorite, Yeah. But here we have 10%. But it wasn't just 10%, it was a Samaritan, right? And what do we know about Samaritans? They're good. Luke teaches us that they're good, right? We have the Good Samaritan. Remember that story in 10? So the Good Samaritan. But back then, Samaria was an emotional kind of knife. Because Assyria, way back when they conquered, King David's throne, they defiled the tombs, they defiled all of that, where we just read First Samuel. They defiled all of it. And they did this thing, which we are guilty of as well. They did this thing where when you conquered a land, the best way to continue conquering a land is to transplant people. So the people that belonged in that land, they took them to other lands, right? And then they brought in new people into that land. And it would be paying back favors and different things. And so the problem is they'll say, well, they transplanted all the people, but that's not usually the case. You can tell archaeologically they probably would have transplanted, depending on the area, different sites, but a certain percentage. So some of the people left behind would have been Jewish with no rights, no nothing. They just knew how to work the land or whatever. And then there was the governing group that came in. And the thing about the governing group, I kind of like to compare them to oftentimes American immigrants when they came over. This group that came over, they would have been people that are looking for a better life. They would have been willing to leave their homes, willing to do that, to go to a new promised land. Maybe they were hungry, maybe there wasn't enough jobs, maybe they were a second or third son. So they would have come over to this land, and they would have commingled, but these people would have been in power, but they're kind of insecure because they've had a rough lot, and this is a rough land, and it's not their home, and then they kind of mingle, and they have a problem. Well, this goes on and on and on throughout history, and it's tricky because there's a blending, right? So when you have two cultures and they come together, there tends to be a blending of values, a blending of prayers, a blending of customs, a blending. Now, to the original Pharisees who kept the original Hebrew laws and doctrines, this looked messed up. This is not what they wanted, right? In fact, we know what they wanted because of the uprising that leads to the temple's destruction is eventually, 60-some years later, the temple falls because the Pharisees lead a full-out war and protest against Rome, trying to reclaim that land. So this group, historically, just from a historical perspective, does not like the melting pot over here, doesn't like the blending customs, doesn't like any of that. But Luke binds himself to the Samaritans in that community, and he goes into Acts 1:8, and he treats Samaria as the first field of Christianity. So it's important to understand the history of what's going on here, because he's using this community, this context, blending values, blending community, people that are both immigrants and they would be natural folk, community as what Christianity could look like. I think it's important that we look at that from our own context. And we go into this story of a Samaritan who says thank you to Jesus, and he does that thing, and he does thank you. But here's my favorite part. So this is a fun legalist argument. You have the one Pharisee that says, well, technically, he disobeyed the rabbi. He was told to go to the temple and present himself, which you had to do if you had any sort of skin or infectious disease. You had to go, and the priest would say, oh, yes, they're clean, right? And so did the Samaritan who stopped and came back to Jesus, did he disobey Jesus? No? Yeah. Yeah. So there's this debate. So so many say no, and the ones who say no, he didn't disobey Jesus, say for the fact that Jesus was the God, right? Jesus was the rabbi. Jesus' body was the temple. And so they're like, that's the legalist argument. And it's really interesting because the Greek word used in verse 16 is Eucharisto. So even the earliest, the writer, when wrote in Greek, that person recognized that Jesus was it. This is the one. This is the God that we've been waiting for. And he gets pretty excited. And notice his response as he comes and he runs down and he's embarrassing himself. Not that, he's just over the moon. Now let me ask you this question. What was Simon Peter's reaction when he really recognizes that Jesus is who he says he is? Don't look at me, Lord. I've shamed you, right? But this guy, he's like, this is God. And he gets excited and he goes in front of him and he's jumping and he's happy. And it reminds us the warmth that Jesus responds to him was that Jesus was human. And as humans, it feels good to be thanked, right? For our work. It feels good. That Jesus needed encouragement in ministry. I think about the woman who does the ointment, right? And brings the oil at communion. And he says, remember this woman? It felt good to be loved. And I really do believe deeply that God wants an authentic relationship with all of us. And so our call or our mission is to literally thank God, to have a healthy relationship with God. It's not so we can ask that we get things. We're not all going to be lucky and pray and pray and pray and have a miracle happen. Anybody that's ever witnessed a miracle, you recognize instantly it's not of your doing. It's of God's doing. No one can control it, and nobody has all the answers. But faith, this is a section of faith. So remember the mustard seed was a section of faith. It's not about how much faith you have. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, that's enough to move a mountain. So this follows the faith. And then faith is a verb. It's an action. Gratitude in the same way, Greek language, is an action. It is a verb. It's a way of being. Okay, so we're going to talk real quickly. They've done many studies, and I'll share the one this week because you know how I like to share my studies that I do. They ask people, they love to do this study. They ask people, go, and I want every night you to write down 5 things that irritate you. So half the test subjects will go and write down 5 things that irritate them. Then the other half of the test subjects every night are encouraged to write 5 things that they're grateful for. Which group was healthier at the end of the study? Yeah, the grateful one. Consistently the grateful ones. They've shown studies that people who practice gratitude, so remember it's not just I'm a grateful person, but practice gratitude, those people have higher immune systems, those people have better results from treatment plans, everything. And I don't say this to make anybody feel bad for their feelings or upset. the important part is practicing gratitude changes us, and it changes us in a way that we are called to be changed. It's not the way of the world. Does the news channels practice gratitude? No, I hated work. We would work with different nonprofits, so I would work with Habitat and domestic violence shelters, and we would have this big fundraiser. Community organizers would come together, different churches with different doctrines would come together, and we would pray, this sounds so silly, that it'd be a slow news night so they might give us a little attention and show something good happening. It's true, because if there was big news, nobody wanted to hear that. So we have to practice gratitude, and we have to be keen to it. So if you're spending an hour watching the news, and they try to do the one happy story at the end, but that's not cutting it. If you turned off your news this week, and instead of watching the news, wrote down things that made you happy, do you think your health might improve? Yeah, or your mental health would improve? Because here's the thing. Jesus had already physically healed the leopard, but he says, your faith, your practicing gratitude, that was his faith, your faith has made you well. Anybody here ever meet somebody that survived something traumatic, terrible, and they never seem to really recover? And I think we all can, in some ways, be guilty of that. And they have to ask themselves, whoa, what I have not recovered. And so you have to go through and figure the ways to make yourself well again. It's a spiritual wellness, a wholeness. I've met different foster kids, so I talk different foster kids programs and stuff, and they'll say to me, Catherine, you've been married for 16 years. That's pretty rare for a person who aged out of the foster care system. And they'll say, what's your secret? First off, I know lots of foster kids and healthy marriages, but my biggest secret is I am just so thankful to have my husband. I thank God for him every night. I thank him. Like I've met the worst abusers. I've met men and women. I've just met some really terrible situations. That when I go to bed, I am a truly grateful heart. It's just really sad that it takes that for me to have a grateful heart, right? That's the sad part. So my prayer for all of you today is that you will practice gratitude. Don't just say I'm thankful. Don't just send one note here or there, but to practice gratitude. And whatever that might be. Maybe every night you have a gratitude journal and you write down one or two things you're thankful for. Maybe you do write thank you notes, right? I'm going to write 2 thank you notes a week. I want you to practice your faith. Amen?